Hvor myndavél var það sem ég var að horfa í? Þessi neðri. Hello, good people. My name is Bergur Ebbi, and I'm here at the Reykjavík City Theatre, Borgarleikhús, where I have been performing a lecture or a play called Skjáskot, or Screenshot in English, during this semester in the theatre. And during this time, there's a lockdown in the theatre and we are not able to perform the shows like people are experiencing all over the world. And I am talking to you in English because there was just an English translation of the book Skjáskot, which looks like this in Icelandic. The English version is just available now, and the lecture that I was doing here at the Reykjavík City Theatre was based on this book. And there's always been a plan to do this lecture in English as well. And why not use the opportunity to maybe read one or two chapters from the English translation of the book to see if that can maybe lead to something. This stream is available through the YouTube channel of the Reykjavík City Theatre, Borgarleikhús, and the Facebook page of the Reykjavík City Theatre, as well as visir.is, and it will be available there. A little bit about the book before I start reading. Screenshot in English, Skjáskot in Icelandic, is an essay about our perception of technology and the future, and how technology, especially information technology, social media, is changing a little bit our perception of the future and our perception of time and place as well. And I spent a lot of time researching and thinking about these things in the past years. And what I've experienced now during these very strange times that we're going through now in the coronavirus pandemic is that a lot of the themes and challenges and possibly opportunities as well of what we call the fourth industrial revolution, artificial intelligence, hyperconnectivity, and those things. These things have really taken a quantum leap in the past few weeks. Now when a big portion of the world is in lockdown and we don't have the opportunity to meet face to face, we are pushed to use technology to be creative and do all sorts of things. And even though it's a big challenge and hindrance in many ways, I'm almost surprised, and I would even say to a point pleasantly surprised, that we are still available, that we are able to cope with that, and that this is what we should say, that the internet and the connectivity or the cloud, as we call it, is actually coping with the situation. That the bandwidth is like all the systems are still up, and we are able to communicate our ideas with these methods. And I think that this and the past few weeks is a real testament of the capabilities of these of this technology, but it's also a testament of the challenges, and it just kind of exaggerates the situation a whole lot, because I think that, and what actually is this is written before the coronavirus pandemic, but what the book cover here says is, have we all been uploaded to the cloud? Because I feel that just like the story of the past decades or so, maybe half a century or so, is people migrating from the countryside into cities, and that is the big narrative and story of urbanization, how we live and dwell in cities now, and the city is our natural habitat now. But the story of the next decades, and a story that has already begun, is not going from country to city, but rather going from city to cloud. And that means that a lot of ideas about nationality and a lot of ideas that have to do with our identity are quickly changing when we are all uploaded into the cloud. And even though these times now that we cannot see the outcome of have maybe bolstered nationalism and other sometimes even questionable means of identity, I also feel that it is encouraging us to think more globally, because when everybody in the world is kind of experiencing the same thing at the same time, it also increases our sense of unity across all borders and other political ideologies. But what we all seem to believe in, with of course notable exceptions, is that we seem to believe in the power of information technology. And in the book Skjáskot, I talk a lot about how these things have become a part of our identity, just like religion was maybe before, and other themes like that. But that should be enough for an introduction of the book, which I'm very happy that it's out just in a few weeks. It will be available here in the Icelandic market and online. And this translation, wonderful translation, was done by Larissa Kaiser, who is an American who speaks Icelandic, and she did a wonderful job in this translation. And I'm very happy to share it with you. And I'm going to read the opening chapter of the book Skjáskot, which deals with the same themes as the lecture Skjáskot that I've been doing here in the Reykjavik City Theatre. And this opening chapter is called "Do We Believe in the Future?" And it kind of explains my position and why I'm addressing you and so forth. I want to start this book with a disclosure. This book was originally written in Icelandic, and I, its author, was born and raised in that scantily populated island in the North Atlantic called Iceland. My whole way of thinking about the future might very well differ from yours, dear reader, and it's possible that we're going to have to meet in the middle sometimes. For starters, I'd like to get the terms right. What do I mean when I ask someone if they believe in the future? Firstly, when I ask whether you believe in the future, it's not acceptable to say, I believe everything is going to hell and we're all going to die, or however you'd put it. That's not believing in the future. That's apathy, which I have no desire to cure you of. Secondly, I am not asking about your personal future. You might want to start a family and have children, or travel to India and do lots of things, and that's all fine. But this question is about the future, something collective. Like when people believed there was a promised land on the far side of the desert. And that brings me back to my initial disclosure. As I mentioned, I come from a very small nation. There are only about 360,000 of us who live in the country and speak the language, and on top of that, we are an island, isolated from the rest of the world by sea. Growing up, the general rhetoric about the future, the way my parents and artists and politicians on TV talked, was that it was our common responsibility to become more modern. Responsibility isn't even a strong enough word. It felt like we were fulfilling a prophecy. And being modern basically meant like being like the bigger nations, or just the rest of the world for that matter. To be less isolated, in other words, to belong. That was our future. To sync up with everyone else. To eat the same food that people in big cities eat. Pizza, sushi, kebabs. To wear the same clothes, to grow the same beards. That was modernization. That was the future. But then something happened. The prophecy came true. Just like the nations of the Eastern Bloc, our isolation was lifted. We did become modern. We stopped being behind on ideas and thoughts. Trends started coming to us so easily, first with TV and then with a cloud of information that hovers everywhere, the one that some still mistakenly refer to as the internet. So when I ask myself this question now, do I believe in the future? I am not so sure anymore. The future was to belong, and now that that has been accomplished, it's almost like there is no future. It's great to have escaped the isolation, but I just wonder who I belong to now. What group do I share a future with? Because when we talk about the future in this sense, you can only have one if you share a common vision with someone else. One has to believe that we as a whole are going somewhere, or at least that we mean to go somewhere. So I pose the question again, do we believe in the future? Wouldn't it be strange if we didn't? There's so much talk about the future, about all the things that technology is going to bring us. It's got to be exciting for us. We're in the midst of a fourth industrial revolution. Isn't that exciting? To be doing something for the fourth time. No? But seriously, if we want to find sweeping prophecies about the future that anyone believed in, we've got to go back some 50, 60 years at least. Back then, there was still such a thing as belief. The belief in never-ending expansion, colonies on Mars, flying cars, the Jetsons living it up in a burger joint in space. Today, all this has long since become cliché. A few strong-jawed American alpha males landed on the moon and saw it was just a bunch of rocks, and with that, the future was finished. People stopped chasing tomorrow and instead started looking inwards, forging stronger bonds, strengthening human rights, fostering mental health. For the past several decades, leading technology firms have put more and more emphasis on the individual. It started off rather harmlessly with user-friendly personal computers. The iMac wasn't that scary when it was first introduced back in '98, but that lowercase I at the beginning of the word has actually come to be rather symbolic. Like a magic rune, it cast a spell that we are still under. After iMacs, there were iPods and then iPhones, and there was always that small I leading the way. Cameras became front-facing, and social media came along, and all of a sudden, the people of the world weren't living in the same timeline anymore. The person next to you on the morning commute might be in a totally different world than yourself. The person next to you might be listening to a song and dreaming about the future, and you might be listening to another song and also dreaming about the future. But if your dreams don't come from the same place, the two of you don't believe in the future. But why should you have a future with a random stranger? Because that's what believing in the future is. If you only share beliefs with the people who an algorithm has calculated that you will share beliefs with, you aren't actually sharing anything. The future has been taken away from us. I wanted it to be some evil guy with a pig snout in a three-piece suit who'd taken it so we could follow him down an alley, rough him up a bit, and get our future back. But it's not like that. The future vanished because we can't stand being preached to anymore. For over a decade now, we've used social media where our thoughts and opinions are always right, where individual experience is paramount, where you disagree to disagree with people and then you don't hear from them ever again. We have been living in echo chambers, and the only writing on the wall that we see is our own. There are no common narratives about the future anymore. There are no prophecies. Where would such prophecies come from anyway? Prophecies are born of mankind's deepest fears. All prophecies stem from fear because all prophecies are, by nature, prophecies about the world coming to an end. You can't take a stance unless there's some sort of end-of-day scenario that you're positioning yourself against. Because prophecies are never just prophecies, they're stances. We've seen this for millennia. The Christian version of the apocalypse involves the skies cracking open and Jesus coming down and passing judgment on everyone, which is why Christian churches' giant steeples point upwards towards the heavens. The Cold War version of the apocalypse was the extermination of mankind in a nuclear blast. And that's why the prophecies of that era all presuppose the discovery of space colonies. That way, we'd someday be able to abandon the planet we destroyed. But what are the fears of our times? Climate change, How about end of the world scenarios where cities are destroyed in floods and unpredictable weather causes crop failure, starvation and migration? These are based on scientific fact, but the narrative is also powerful because the scenarios sound biblical. These are great fears that seem worthy of common prophecy and collective stance. Another example could be the COVID-19 pandemic, which is sweeping the world as I write these very words. This is a genuine disaster. It has taken lives and created great fear. It's already had catastrophic consequences, but what's really intriguing about the COVID-19 pandemic is that we are all experiencing it together. It is not like most other things we experience catered to our individual needs and expectations. It just is what it is. Something far greater than any individual fear or hope. These kinds of narratives are the ones that actually create a common future, good or bad, because not all common futures are good. Common futures should be thought of as beyond good and evil. A shared future can create hope, but a shared future has also justified warfare and horrendous actions in the past. So let's be careful when we talk about and discuss these things. And keep in mind, the only thing that brings climate change and global pandemics into this discussion is how grand and biblical their narratives are. But what if there is even a grander narrative, so gigantic in scope that we can't even see or hear it or put it into words? The horrific phenomena mentioned above are frightening because they threaten our very lives. They carry with them the threat of annihilation. This is a narrative that's deeply locked in our muscle memory, the fear of plague and floods. But what if there actually is a thing that we fear more than annihilation? What if the thing that we're actually afraid of is that nothing gets destroyed anymore? When you think about it, it's actually just as scary as it is comforting that when borders were closed and major corporations shut their doors in the spring of 2020 because of the spread of COVID-19, demanded we all practice social distancing, that so many functions of our society continued seamlessly in the cloud. Like our bodies and all the germs that they carry had become a nuisance. Is it possible that the earth will not be destroyed in a cloud of smoke, but rather that all thoughts, shapes and fears will forever exist in a cloud of smoke? Is that a worthy thought? What kind of future do we have with that fear lingering in the back of our minds? Now look, I'm not going to presume to speak for all humankind. I'm just going to say what I fear most. I'm afraid that we are going to lose all context. I know this is a bit of a bold claim, but fortunately I have nearly 200 pages to explain what I mean, but it doesn't actually have to be all that complicated. I can explain it perfectly if I tell you a quick story about a nightmare I had when I was a kid. When I was 12 years old, I caught a nasty case of the flu. Remember, the old kind that didn't shut down the global economy, and was laid up with a fever for a few days. I had the same dream the whole time. In it, a giant metal man came into my room, picked up my wardrobe, and squashed it into a little cube. It was a terrifying nightmare because I felt like I was awake the whole time. I watched as the metal man took the wardrobe, which had to have been about 200 pounds, and compacted it down with his powerful metal arms until it was about the size of your average Monopoly dice. Then he walked over to me and stuck it in my mouth. The metal man didn't do anything else. He just left me there with that dice in my mouth, a 1 square centimeter cube weighing a few hundred pounds, and then walked away. I felt that colossal mass resting in my mouth. The proportions were absurd. But what do you do with something that's in your mouth? You swallow it. And this is the apocalypse that informs my future. I don't think it'll become a reality. I'm an optimist. I don't think humanity will meet its end in fire, but rather in something quite the opposite. A never-ending expansion of meaning and knowledge until eventually people are no match for the colossal mass that devour every day. I'm afraid that the scale and proportion of the platforms we use on a daily basis, like Twitter and Facebook, are subjectively, systematically compacting wardrobes many times the size of our bodies and making us swallow them whole. And there you have it, a prophecy. Maybe it's arrogant to make predictions about the future, but I'd argue that it can also be pretty damn arrogant not to. And to answer the question I posed in the beginning, I believe in the future. It isn't gone, it's just been laid aside somewhere, where it still sits now, covered in dust. So that was the opening chapter of Skjáskot, which then dwells into themes about context and meaning and how algorithms and artificial intelligence and tag culture, or whatever we could call it, the ability to so easily take one thing from one context and lift it into another, how all these things have created a new world order, or a new information world order, where what we could call mundane experience has been lifted, and this has come at the cost of conventional scientific exploration. It has come at the cost of conventional political decision making, and many other things that luckily have been explained by many scholars and people in the past years. But I tried to, in the book Skjáskot, I tried to do this with in a matter-of-fact way. Try to take examples and I take and draw examples from everyday life and how we are. Because one of my main insights after exploring these things is that the fourth industrial revolution and the emergence of artificial intelligence is not what I really perceived it to be. Because I always perceived it to be that computers are analyzing us and becoming more and more like us, and they are starting to be more human, and they're starting to evaluate things like humans and getting more of that human judgment, and that's what artificial intelligence was in my mind. And I always thought of it because artificial intelligence has been around for the most part of my life, and I remember when computers were starting to win people in chess for the first time, and then the occurrence happened when a computer started to win the world champion of chess in the 90s. Garry Kasparov, who was a world champion, FIDE champion of chess at the time, was beaten by a computer hardware and software from IBM called Deep Blue. And I always thought, oh, this is how it's going to be. Computers are winning us at chess now, and then they're going to win us at more and more things, and that's how we're going to go into this phase of artificial intelligence. But what I've discovered and learned more and more as I've explored this is that artificial intelligence is not only computers analyzing us and becoming more and more like us. It's just as much we being conditioned and we being streamlined and approaching computer processing and computer thinking. So we're meeting the computers halfway, or in the middle. I think it's interesting because in our relationships with technology, information technology, the computers or the software, which is essentially, in the end, developed by humans, of course, but the software sometimes asks us if we are human. And we all know examples of this, like when we go to websites and they ask us to proceed, you have to prove that you are a human. It's usually called the I'm not a robot test. And the I'm not a robot test is pretty easy. We are supposed to sometimes click on images on a board, and we're supposed to click on something like, click on all the images that do not, or do have, or include a traffic light or something, some mundane object that we as humans know so well. And we are kind of amazed that the computers are not able to do that. And whenever I do that kind of test, I just go through the images and I click on this and this and this. And I always think, oh, this was so easy, done and done. And then I click, I'm not a robot, and then I proceed to the website. But when I think about it, I think there probably isn't a moment in my life where I'm actually less human than that very moment, where I've undertaken that very, very banal and conditioned test made out by the computer to prove that I'm not a robot. And I think that is testament to how we are kind of meeting the computers midway, in the middle, in that sense. But I want to read one other chapter from the book before we end this. And this is kind of in the middle of the book, and it's about how this whole process has maybe changed political landscape and our sense of leadership, and who or what we want us to lead the way in our not only political, not only on the political landscape, but I think just generally, spiritually, who or what can be a leader in a world, in this new world order or context. And this chapter is called Meet World. It's said that every nation gets the leader it deserves. That being said, however, it's not just Americans who have opinions about the leader of the United States, because the leader of the United States is, in some ways, the leader of the whole world. What Americans deserve, the rest of us also have to make our peace with, which is why it isn't ridiculous to ask if perhaps the current American president is the leader that all of us deserve. Isn't he the answer to the ADHD and vanity of the modern person? The person who starts yawning whenever they have to read real news that doesn't revolve around scandals and childish quarrels. Isn't he a fitting dose of poetic justice for the internet trolls who pick fights on this side or that before reaching for the popcorn bowl and starting to munch as they watch other people's woes play out in the pale blue glow of their smartphone screen? Isn't said president just an inflated version of the average Joe who's got an opinion about everything and uses modern technology to strengthen his case? The person whose digital closets are full of skeletons and yet has no qualms about giving other people advice on social media and holding forth about ethical issues, some of which are so complex that discussions about them used to be the sole province of experts. If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then I'd argue that the President of the United States of America is purely a digital figure. The internet troll to take all internet trolls. The digital answer to the digital reality of world. If the power structure of most friend groups or organizations depends on a steady flow of information playing out in front of everyone on social media, then why shouldn't the most powerful man in the world play the same game and share his every last thought and about every last thing every few hours on Twitter? This theory has made the rounds a number of times, and I've got nothing to add to it myself, but it doesn't seem to go anywhere, and it doesn't shock people over much either. People just shrug, which is why I have another theory, one that's totally different, and it just might change everything. And here's my theory. Donald Trump isn't the digital answer to anything. He is, on the contrary, as undigital as he could be. The world's become too digital, you see, and so it needed a meaty counterweight. What is it about him that made him the cosmic focus of all conversations? Are we sure it isn't just the corporal fact of the man, the visceral meat of him? It seems like no one can ever remember what exactly he said, but everyone can call to mind an image of those plump pink fingers, that orange face. For weeks, I had the man's brisket on the brain. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but I just couldn't stop thinking about the guy's tenderloin, and I'm convinced that there was something similar going on with other people. It may well be that his opinions have raised some hackles, but millions of people have the same opinions that Trump does without any of them eliciting the same amount of interest or getting the same kind of support. What really got our attention then was the pork chop proclaiming the message. because deep down everyone fantasizes about meat. This isn't sexual. I'm talking about your basic bacon-wrapped fantasies. Hot dogs on a grill, a leg of lamb in the oven, ground beef squeezing out of a meat grinder. Myself, I love packaged meat in supermarkets. If I had no other obligations, I'd do nothing else all day than fiddle with cellophane-wrapped foam trays, weighing the glistering, bright red hunks of meat in my hands. I sometimes also fantasize about stockpiling meat, filling the freezer with bite-sized pieces of animal carcass, slowly organizing beef fillets in the fridge. I imagine these scenes over and over in my mind. It's not a good thing, not a bad thing. It just is. Most of the pivotal moments in human history include meat. Back in the day, I was made to eat the body of Christ. People are obsessed with meat because ourselves are meat. A lot of people have been on the right track with their analysis of the president. I've come across a number of theories that suggest the president's magnetism comes not from what he says, but rather how he says it. People have studied his body language, his gestures, even his wheezy breathing, and many of them agree that these features are a big part of why people gravitate to him. But why can't we just say it outright? People want carrion. They want a flesh ballad drummed out on the taut belly of a wild boar. They want goblins dancing on the beach while a pig roasts slowly on a spit and the scent of burnt bacon blends with the salty sea air. And it's almost laughable. For such a long time, people thought it was all about his hair. What is the deal with his hair? They kept saying. Is it real? Why is it piss-colored? That hair will go down in the history books as a red herring, because when it comes down to it, it wasn't his hair, but his physical presence that drew us in. That cylindrical banana body, that orange, tight-skinned meatloaf, because people are bored of the opposite. Cloud computing, levity, blue skies, fresh air, froth. What they wanted was a poor pocket sack of sweat glands, and they wanted as much of it as possible. They wanted to pull a thick and meaty slice of turkey up to their chins, lie under it like a beige egg under a hen. We're so starved for something tangible, corporal, that we'd all like to just lie down under a carcass. Crush me, carcass. Shut off the flow of oxygen to my brain. Make me into the pate I so crave. Is this a bad theory? Yes. Which is why you should give more credence to the other one. And what was that again? Oh yeah, that Trump is just doing the same thing that any number of other people do. That is, playing the most convenient card every hand and doing it as fast as possible. Of course, as a leader, he should be above all that. But in our disinfected dreamland, the gameplay is probably not a lot more complicated than that. The fat fingers that dance the fastest across the touchscreen get the most attention, and in our context-less world, attention equals power. Or maybe there's something to both theories. Maybe we're just scared of computers and their perfect calculations. Maybe we're afraid that our world domination won't last much longer, and so want to maximize our final moments by handing over control to a person who is as unlike a computer as it's possible to be. So much about our digital progress is relentless and ethically unjustifiable. So maybe for some people, there's a kind of atonement in having a leader who isn't better than all that. We are ultimately all made of meat, but unlike the everlasting cloud of digital media, all meat has an expiration date. It rots. So that was the chapter Meat World from Skjáskot, originally Skjáskot in Icelandic, now available in an English translation by Larissa Kaiser under Skjáskot. Hopefully I will be available to address you again, maybe even here in the Reykjavik City Theatre in English. It was always a dream to do the Skjáskot lecture in English as well, and this could be possibly a count into that, but we don't really know what the future holds. I hope you all stay well, and in this lockdown, and that hopefully we will have a nice time in the theater next winter. And it was a real pleasure reading to you. I know that most of the people that are using this stream are Icelandic, but it was also good to make the exception and do something in English, because there are also a lot of people in Iceland, Icelandic people and other people that don't speak Icelandic, and I'm just very happy that the message and thoughts of my work here have been translated to English, and I can't wait to get that out to you. I'm very happy with the job Larissa, the translator, did. Very happy about being here in the Reykjavik City Theatre, Borgarleikhús, with you. Until next time, thank you.